Hello, students. It is me, Professor Wood, and since I don't have you in class today, I thought that I would record this short video for you. So I'm just going to share my screen with you so that you can see what I've got here as far as the poems this week. So I'm going to start with the poem, I Felt a Funeral in My Brain. Now I'm going to attempt to annotate these poems with Microsoft Word. I don't know how it will go because I have not done this. I don't have my document camera at home, so just going to do the best that I can. So of course, if you remember, one of the things that I discussed with you all when you're annotating poetry is to almost always use mist. And mist, I'm just going to put this to the side. M-I-S, wow. I-S-T. Okay, so and that stands for mood, imagery, structure, and theme and tone. So those are the things that we're going to keep in mind as we read through the poems. And then I'm going to do these in the specific order that I have them, but these are all by Emily Dickinson. Now, if you have read in your textbook, like you were supposed to, you have read the background of Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson was preoccupied with death. I have mentioned in class that she was jilted by potential suitors several times, and she spent the rest of her life alone, but she was also diagnosed with something called Bright's disease, which is a disease of the kidneys, and eventually it would take away her sight. So Emily was preoccupied with death. She was deeply, deeply religious. And so as we read through the poems and discuss them and sort of talk about the mood, the imagery, the structure, and the theme and tone, or the tension in the poems, we'll discuss that. Now, I will scan my notes, but my notes are all in the same color so that you will actually be able to see them, and I'll post them to Google Classroom for you. But my handwriting is like chicken scratch, as you well know from annotations we have done in class. But this particular poem, I Felt a Funeral in My Brain. It's number 340. So Emily Dickinson didn't actually name any of her poems that she wrote. In fact, in Emily's will, she left instructions for all of her poems to be destroyed. She did not want anybody to ever read them, which would have been a very sad thing to happen for the literary world because her poems are so rich and deep. Thankfully, nobody obeyed her orders, and her sister-in-law had them all published. But one thing about Emily is, like I said, she was most definitely very much involved with the process of thinking about death. So that was something that she was really preoccupied with. Okay, so I'm going to read this poem first, and then I'm going to go over some of the things about it, and we can talk, or I can discuss the different interpretations that I have heard from students over the years, as well as my own interpretations. I have analyzed almost her entire body of work, and these three poems in particular are poems that I am very, very passionate about and I love, and so I always teach what I love. And these particular poems are all poems that I have written papers over. So I Felt a Funeral in My Brain. It's number 340 out of her 1,500 or so poems that she wrote. I felt a funeral in my brain, and mourners to and fro kept treading, treading till it seemed that sense was breaking through. And when they were all seated, a service like a drum kept beating, beating, till I thought my mind was going numb. And then I heard them lift a box and creak across my soul. With those same boots of lead again, then space began to toll. As all the heavens were a bell and being but an ear, and I in silence, some strange race, wrecked solitary here. And then a plank in reason broke, and I dropped down, and hit a world at every plunge, and finished knowing then. Now, this is the end of the poem. I do want to mention that in Emily Dickinson's original writings, in her handwriting, in her manuscript, there was a line that was left out in the final stanza, and that is the line crashed, and there was a dash, and the words got through. So I'll get to that when I get to the fourth stanza. But looking at this particular poem, it can be thought of as two different ways. First of all, I would definitely say the mood is a boohoo mood. It could be thought of as a sad poem. It could also be thought of as a spiritual poem. So for some scholars feel that this particular poem is sad and depressing because it has all of these negative connotations. It has the word funeral, it has beating and numbness, and then box and boots of lead and space. So it's got wrecked and it's got plank and reason. So he's got all these negative connotative words in here. But it could also be thought of as sort of a spiritual poem and on a positive level, depending upon your belief system. So just going into it, most of her poems are metaphorical in nature. So one of the most interesting things about Emily Dickinson is a lot of her poetry can be sung to the tune of Amazing Grace. And it's called hymnal poetry, technically. So in this particular poem, if you think about the song Amazing Grace and the rhythm of it, I felt a funeral in my brain and mourners to and fro, kept treading till it seemed that sense was breaking through. It goes to the same rhythm as Amazing Grace. So anyway, looking at the first stanza, of course, you see that it has 5 quatrains. It has a total of 20 lines. You see she does a lot of unusual things in the poem itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is say the mood is, I'm going to go with the spiritual. So I'm going to say it's more of a positive mood. Again, you can decide for yourself. Poetry is, when one reads it and one develops an interpretation, typically it is based on life experiences, and certainly not, there's no right or wrong answer. So for me, I think of this poem more as a meditative state. And so I'm going to just put that here. And I'm going to highlight a couple of things here. So she has the first line, I felt a funeral in my brain. So I'm going to highlight this line. And then I am going to just sort of do some annotations here. So here it's kind of, she's talking about mentally a funeral. Okay, funeral has a negative connotation to it, right? She's thinking about her brain dying. Okay, and then she says in the second line, and mourners to and fro. So when you say something is going to and fro, that is most definitely a reference to people walking. So we've got that. And then she has here kept treading and treading. So I'm just going to highlight that in a different color. I will use purple, of course. You all know I love purple. And treading again. So I'm going to put here after that in parentheses, this is repetition here. And then you have something really interesting. Okay, so you see every line, of course, starts with a capital, but she has random capitalization in here. So mourners here, I'll pick a different color. Let's go with, I don't know, green. And then since here, again, we're going to go with the highlighter and we'll go with green. That sense was breaking through. Now, Emily Dickinson was known for her use of the M dash, or what most scholars refer to as enjambment. E-N-J-A-M-B-M-E-N-T, just making sure I'm spelling it correctly. And this is an interruption in thought. Okay, so with her use of the dash, and the enjambment, that is definitely an interruption in thought. She does this with treading and treading. You've got the repetition, and then you have the capitalization. the capitalization is important because it really demonstrates a couple of different things. Is it reality? Is it normal thinking? I mean, who thinks about funerals in their brain? Or is it a sense of a higher reality? So if you're thinking about things, and I'm going to change my font when I get finished with the annotations. But with that particular aspect of it, it's important to sort of look at that information. So I'm looking at it as a positive thing. And so I'm also going to put here structure. And then 5 quatrains. Okay. So that's for the structure aspect of it. Okay. So in the second stanza, you've got, and then they were all seated. Okay. So here, I'm just going to go out a little bit here. And this is referencing mourners. Okay. And then service like a drum. So again, what do drums do? Drums, Janisha, you'll really like this one specifically because drums beat a rhythm. Again, there is the relentless drumming that one hears in their ears. And again, thinking about that in reference to death, it could be a couple of different things. It could be relentless drumming, harming of the sense of self, if you're looking at it from the depressive side, or it could be okay in a spiritual sense. So you sort of want to think about that rhythm. It says a service like a drum. So the funeral was rhythmic, RHYTHMIC, possibly harms sense. Just move that over here. I'll go to the next line here and put my ellipsis, harms sense of self. Okay. And then my mind was going numb. Okay. So again, and in thinking about this in the spiritual sense, if your mind is going numb, it could be a good thing. It could be possibly okay in a spiritual sense. Again, it depends on how you're looking at the poem itself. Now, the third stanza, we have a shift. And then I heard them lift a box. Obviously, you know, the box that she's referring to is a coffin. So there's some part of her has died. And I'm abbreviating. So I'm just gonna make this here. Whoopsie. Again, like I said, I didn't know how these annotations were going to go. So I'm just going to make this writing a little bit smaller. We'll go to 12. Okay. So some part of her is dead. And then again, going back to, and creak across my soul. Okay. So the next line here with those same boots of lead, I'm going to highlight that, or actually, I think that I'm going to change the font color there to red. And that is very important when looking at things, because boots of lead, that means it's heavy. If you were wearing boots that were made of lead, don't you think that that would be heavy? Certainly, it really sort of means with those same boots of lead, again, then space began to toll. So here's really where there's a little bit of a shift, and why, one of the reasons why I say this poem is a little more spiritual in nature rather than being so dark and twisty. Her physical body has died. Okay. And light can enter. Ever heard the song by Metallica, Enter Sandman? Kind of makes me think about that. If you know what I'm talking about, probably not. Okay, so in the fourth stanza, here is again a bit of a change. So I'm just going to highlight this entire stanza here. We'll pick a different color, and we'll go here, and then I will type out. So I'm going to change my font color here, and we will go with red here, and no highlighting. So again, with the red font. In this particular, as all the heavens were a bell and being but an ear. So again, she's making that comparison. Her existence becomes an ear and can hear. The depth of awareness is very important. The depth of awareness allows her spiritual awareness to arrive. So again, an eye and silence. So she's saying, like, I'm friends with silence. And then she says, some strange race. She's personifying death. And then the next line 16, where she says wrecked, solitary here. So there's a lot of interesting things here. So I'm just going to type her. Got to get rid of the highlighting here. Font color. Let's go up here. The highlighting. Sorry, folks, I'm still learning. And trying not to stop highlighting. There we go. All right. So her being, it's not going to work. So let's just get rid of it all. No color. And then automatic. Okay. Why is it doing this to me now? Anyway, okay. So I'm just gonna, her being becomes an ear. EAR, and that's a simile. Okay. So again, I'm going to make my font size 12. Okay. And then I'm going to highlight in a different color here. Okay. So sorry, it's red and green Christmas colors. Okay. And then we're going to go to the depth of awareness allows spiritual awareness to arrive. And so I'm going to make that smaller and then change the color again. And we'll go to green and we'll make that smaller. 12. We're going to have to make it even a little bit smaller. It's making my life difficult here because I don't have my document camera. We'll change the font even. Okay, and then we'll go to 10. There we go. All right, and then here in the last two lines, most certainly, you know what? I think I might be able to draw an arrow. Let's see here, insert. Oh, we'll go with a shape. Okay. We'll go with a line. So here, okay. And then I'm going to tell you over here, this is where she personifies silence. Okay. Friend. And then the last line here, draw another line. I think I'm going to end up having to do a lot of different lines here. So we'll go with, we'll draw a text box. That's what I should have done in the first place. And we'll go here and wrecked is maybe shipwrecked into a new being. So we'll make that. Yeah, I don't like that at all. Delete. I'm learning with you. You're probably like, oh my gosh, this lady just needs to shut up. I can figure it out myself. But you know, you're learning with me. So we'll go again to this and we will draw an arrow here. And then I will insert a text box. And we'll go right here. Okay. So the next one I will learn. Okay. So as I said, shipwrecked into a new being. So Emily, like I said, Emily Dickinson was very preoccupied with death and what happens when one dies. And then your last stanza, and then a plank and reason broke, very important. You have here an unusual line break here and a break in thinking. Okay, so insert text box. So draw a line there. And you've got an unusual thinking break. Okay. What do planks do at a cemetery? They hold coffins. So think about that aspect of it. And then I drop down and down and down. And of course here, we know what that is. That is alliteration. So I will just highlight that so that you are aware of that. And then I will draw a text box here. The D sound. Okay. And then, and hit a world at every plunge and finished knowing then. So here you again have, and I'm going to draw another text box. Right over here. And then I'm going to tell you that it's chaos. Okay. Chaos. So again, you can see here and finish knowing then it sort of leaves things unfinished like death. Okay. Death typically does do that. So I'm gonna shift pages here. And we're gonna finish the mist here in just a moment. Now that I've done that. So I'm going to move the mist here. There we go. And we'll go here to the bottom. Well, delete. That's what happens when you're playing with Word. Okay, so, and then I'm going to paste that down. And then turn that upside down. See, I am not nearly as good as you guys with computers. If I don't have my document camera, it's very difficult for me to annotate. Okay. So I don't even know what. Yeah. Drops down and down and down. So that goes there. Okay. So the mist M. Whoops. So the mood of the poem. So again, so we're just going to go. I'm going to insert a text box. That's what I will do. I will draw a text box. So M, I, S, and then we will go up just a tiny little bit. And then T. We'll go down just a tiny bit. All right. So again, the mood for me, like I said, it's spiritual, and sort of positive and not negative. I mean, you can take it any way you want to. Imagery, you have. Why is it doing that? So, funerals. You've got certainly people. You've got mourners. You've got certainly coffin, planks, spell, cemeteries. So I mean, you have all of these different sort of image images that are going on. Structure, you have 5 quatrains. There's no rhyme scheme. Can't spell today. And of course, you also have, again, unusual capitalization. I'll just say caps. The theme and tone of this, to me, I would say sort of, it's almost a ceremony of transformation, from the living to the dead, the realization that she is dead. So to me, that is the theme of the poem, but some people take it as the loss of ego, the loss of self, the loss of a sense of self. It could be any number of things. So that is the poem. I felt a funeral in my brain, in a nutshell, basically. And Emily Dickinson is not for everyone. In fact, a lot of students don't care for her because she deliberately didn't rhyme. But then again, a lot of students like her because she was not afraid to take risks in her writing. Again, as I told you before, she never intended on her poetry being published. It was simply a way for her to, it was a creative outlet that she utilized to deal with her own feelings and her own diagnosis and her own world. And she was really preoccupied with the idea of death and dying. And thinking about that, there are multiple poems that relate to death as far as themes go. But in this particular poem, which I have written on myself, I believe it's a ceremony of transformation. And it's about the realization that everyone dies. So that's just sort of my thought process. And you can see I've gone over it line by line with you. And this next one is one of my absolute favorite Emily Dickinson poems. So it could be thought of one of 2 ways. Obviously, as I told you at the beginning of this video, Emily Dickinson's poems are typically named by their first lines and not by their they don't have titles. They're numbered. Her poems were all numbered because she never intended for publication for them. So I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. The eyes around had wrung them dry and breaths were gathering firm for that last onset when the king be witnessed in the room. I willed my keepsakes, signed away what portion of me be assignable, and then it was there interposed a fly. With blue uncertain stumbling buzz between the light and me, and then the windows failed, and then I could not see to see. So again, looking at this particular poem, you see, again, it could be interpreted one of 2 ways. I heard a fly buzz when I died could be interpreted as a humorous poem. I mean, who hears flies when they die? I promise you these will be my very last words. I hear a fly buzz and then I'm going to die. And I usually make a face when I say that, but since I'm not directly in front of you, I kind of can't. Or some people look at it as a darker poem because, again, with Dickinson's preoccupation with death, it sort of looks at death and the experience of active dying. So let's look at it really. It's not necessarily meant to be taken on excuse me, literal level, because the narrator is dead. Your narrator of this poem is dead. It cannot really be taken literal. It's sort of imagining what it's like to die. So you have 4 stanzas here. And so looking at that, I'm going to go ahead and insert a text box. So insert text box, and we're going to draw one, and we're going to draw one right here for our mist. So we'll do M and then enter, and then I, and then S, and then T. Okay. So we have that in general. So the mood here could be one of 2 ways. It could be funny, humorous, or it could be darker. So again, it depends on how you look at things. Okay. So imagery, you have several things. You've got the fly. Oh, goodness, it's doing that to me again. So we have the fly. We have also, you sort of have the king. So you've got some positive and negative connotations. Flies are not associated with happy things, typically. So they and then the windows, and then darkness. And so blue, the color blue, adjectives matter with Emily Dickinson. Structure, again, there's no rhyme scheme, so it's a free verse poem. You've got a couple of things here, but she definitely uses a lot of enjambment, which is, of course, the use of the em dash. And then you also have adjectives. You have onomatopoeia as well, but those are more literary devices to focus on. So, but you also have rhetoric here. The interesting thing about her use of the dash here, the enjambment, which is the use of the em dash, is indicative of breathing, the rhythm of, well, it's called the death rattle, but it's sort of, I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. So it's kind of supposed to mimic, it's kind of like breath, or it's kind of like blinking, because when someone is in the act of dying, sometimes their eyes blink a lot. So you have that. So it mimics breath or blinking. Okay, so that's the enjambment. And then the theme and tone, again, with theme and tone, we have to sort of break it down. So your narrator, I'm going to draw the shape here, right here, and then insert a text box. And we're just going to make some comments here on the first stanza. On stanza 1, okay, you have here, I heard a fly buzz when I died. Okay, so your narrator is dead. Okay. The stillness in the room. So when you think of where someone dies in Emily Dickinson's time, people didn't go to hospitals to die. They died at home. So the room would have been her bedroom. Okay. A place where she would have been comfortable. Was like the stillness in the air. So again, she uses a simile intentionally there. So that is important. Between the heaves of storm. So the imagery there is also important. The imagery of the storm. And then you have imagery. I don't want to mess with that. When someone dies, it can cause a storm of emotions, a storm of many different things. So between the heaves of storm, I particularly love her use of the word heaves. And if you notice, again, in her poetry, she uses non-traditional capitalization, which I find to be very interesting. Okay, so the second stanza. So I'm going to go again, I'm going to draw a text box. And we're going to make some comments here, or you can make comments on your poems. I gave you copies of them when we were in class last. So I'll be giving the biology EOC when your class meets. So hopefully you're watching this video and reading through the poems with me. But the eyes around had wrung them dry. Essentially, she's saying that people had cried themselves out. Okay, so presumably there were people there that cared about her, knew that she was dying, and had cried themselves out, and the breaths were gathering firm. So when you're waiting for someone to die and you know that their death is imminent or approaching, you're literally standing. It says breaths were gathering firm. So they're waiting for her to die. People, the mourners, the people that cried themselves out. Okay. And then she says from that last onset, when the king be witnessed in the room. So in this particular stanza, it's really important to acknowledge there are two definitive interpretations. Some scholars say that the king that she's referring to is God. Okay. So I'm going to say king, and I'm going to put a question mark, God. Or possibly, if you're like me and you think of things on the darker side, is she referring to the Grim Reaper? When the king be witnessed in the room, who's there to come and get her? Why is she referring to this person as the king? Are these people mourning her or waiting on her to die? The third stanza, she says specifically that she says, I willed my keepsake signed away what portion of me be. So I think that is also extremely important, those lines, because who gets her stuff? She probably had a lot of stuff. I mean, she came from a well-to-do family. I imagine she had furniture and lots of different things. So she's really thinking about what's going to happen to her, who would get her stuff after she dies. And then she says, what portion of me be assignable? So, her stuff was personal to her. And then is when the comic relief comes in. And then it was, there interposed a fly. So this massive fly enters the room at the moment that she is pondering who's going to get her stuff. So is it humorous? Possibly. Some people will think of it that way as humorous. But is it really? She leaves it up to interpretation for the reader. So certainly there's a lot of different things that you can really look at in this particular poem. And then I'm also going to insert an arrow here so that you are aware of which stanza goes with which text box. Okay. And then we'll go here, we'll insert another text box and go to the final stanza here. And look at what is she possibly saying here. So Emily Dickinson likes to pack a powerful punch at the end of her poem. So she says, with blue, uncertain buzz. Okay, with Emily Dickinson, adjectives matter. Okay. With Dickinson. So the buzz is very important. Flies are annoying. Okay. Flies are very annoying. Is the fly, so I'm writing a question, is the fly trying to escape like her spirit? Or fly as a negative connotation feeds on the dead or rotten things. So I have to make the box a little bit bigger there. Okay. So, and then she says, and then the windows failed, and then. So I'm going to insert a arrow here because I think that is a very, very important couplet there towards the end. And what she is saying here is extremely important. And then the windows failed. Guess what? She dies. Okay. So we have these negative connotations. However, this fly coming in as she is in the act of dying. So looking at the theme of the poem, and I know it seems confusing because it doesn't rhyme and it's designed to be humorous. Brianna, I can hear you laughing right now as I'm talking about this particular poem. She is talking about the theme of this poem. She's talking about the act of dying. And she's pondering on whether it is a good thing or a bad thing. Guess what, folks? Death is unavoidable. Everyone is going to die. The only thing that remains in our life is memories when we die, right? So I think that's super important. So the theme here in this particular thing, it is dying is terrible, but it's necessary. Okay, if we don't die, we'll live forever, and that will be awful. So I also want you to think about her rhetoric. And I know some of you hate that word, especially from taking those of you that took AP Lang last year, but rhetoric, certainly her purpose. Why did she use these particular words? She chose to use these words because she either wanted to add humor or she wanted to be dark. In my opinion, this particular poem is humorous simply because she's talking about a fly buzzing into the room at the moment of her death. And the moment her soul leaves her body, she's on the outside looking in, and all she can focus on is not necessarily the mourners and the things that she had and who she was giving everything away to, or had already given away everything, and what she was leaving behind. She's focused, hyper focused on this fly. This fly just comes into the room. You know, is it a bad thing or is it a good thing? Well, flies represent death. They symbolize death. So, and that's just one way of looking at it. So I hope this really kind of helps you break it down and really look at it. You will have questions in your final exam about this particular poem, so it is important to think about those aspects of it. And then I'll go to the final poem that we're doing, and that's my second favorite Emily Dickinson poem. And that is Because I Could Not Stop for Death. This is number 479. And this particular poem is what's known as common meter, and it's a hymn. There are some inconsistencies in the rhyme scheme, but this poem is where I always shock my high school students, because this poem could be rapped. Now, I'm not going to rap it for you, but if you look at it and hear the rhythm as you're listening to it, because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves in immortality. You see and hear sort of the sing-songiness, the rhyme in it. It could absolutely be rapped. And I used to do that, but I'm not going to do that for you today. So you've got the rhyming of me and immortality and civility in this particular poem. You see, you have some near rhyme, you have some end rhyme. You don't necessarily have internal rhyme, but you do have some alliteration. You have a lot of different things, but I'll read the poem first, and then we'll come back and we'll break it down. I'll draw some text boxes, and we'll do some annotations here. So, because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves in immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of grazing grain. We passed the setting sun, or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day. I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. So again, you've got a lot to work with here. So the first thing I'm going to do is insert a text box to do the mist in, and then we will go from there and draw our little arrows. So I'm just going to put M, and then I, and then S, and then T. Okay, so first couple of things. So I'm going to draw a text box in the first stanza, and then I'll put an arrow to it. So on first glance, looking at this first stanza, okay, so you see and feel the sing-songy rhythm and pattern of it, but you have, because I could not stop for death, it kindly stopped for me. So death is being personified here. She's basically saying, he kindly stopped for me. She's saying that death is kind. Now, we don't think of death as being kind. That is some irony. Okay, so I'm just going to put irony in parentheses there. Sort of saying too, because I could not stop for death indicates a level of frenzy, that we so often live our lives in now. We're always busy. We're always got something going on. That's actually what's known as an antithesis. So I'll just put that there in parentheses. And then you've got here, this particular line. So I'm going to go back to the highlighter here, and I'm going to highlight this line, the carriage held but just ourselves. And then I am going to draw an arrow here to this particular line, and then I'll insert a text box there, just a short one, small one, because I think it's important that you acknowledge here the carriage that Emily Dickinson is talking about. Essentially, she's saying the carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. It symbolizes sort of royalty, like Cinderella's carriage, kindness and care. So I will make this a little bit bigger, and we'll go there, and then we will make it a little bit. There we go. We'll move the arrow just a tiny little bit. There we go. Okay, so, and fix my spelling errors. Okay. And immortality. So again, you have your antithesis here. You have death being personified, death being kind. That's ironic, and also indicates that she was living a life of frenzy. So I'm going to say in this particular poem here, you definitely have sort of almost is it a wahoo or a boohoo? It's kind of a mixture of both. So I'm going to say WHMBH because it's a little bit of both. We slowly drove, the second stanza, he knew no haste. So again, she's saying death is loving and kind and taking his time with her. She says, I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. So again, she is saying that death is civil and sophisticated, and that she is, death is being kind. Okay, again, like I said in the first stanza, death is being civil and death is sophisticated. So I think that's a very important to acknowledge what she's saying, because she is saying that, I mean, she's honestly cannot type today. I'm gonna have to fix that. Okay, so give me a second. I will fix that spelling. Bree, I know you're laughing at me. If you're still watching, I'm sure you're probably like, oh my gosh, will this woman ever shut up? So she's definitely saying here, and again, you have the use of the M dash again with the enjambment, cutting things off, but she's saying that labor is associated with work. So she put away her work as well as her leisure, her fun things, sort of to go and be with death. So death interrupted work and fun. So I think that is also important to acknowledge in the second stanza, because she's saying that, death is being kind and civil and death is sophisticated, but it also interrupted her work and her fun. She put it away because he's so sophisticated. He's smooth. Death is smooth. He's like the Grim Reaper here. So in this particular stanza, the third stanza, it's important to look at the words here. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. So this particular stanza is extremely important to the overall interpretation and meaning of the poem. So here you have the 3-stage life cycle. Okay, so you have childhood. Okay, so the school, right? Okay, and then you have and recess in the ring. Okay, and then you have the gazing grain is actually equatable to maturity. And then you also have the setting sun. Again, you have some alliteration, is obviously death, okay? But the sun also is sort of a double entendre here, because the sun equates to life as well. So you have both life and death. This is what's known as pastoral imagery in poetry. So you've got some bucolic and nature and sort of happy things, talking about the 3 stages of life, you know, childhood, your maturity, your death. And you have some alliteration, but one thing I want to point out is the repetition of this word, past. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight it, because it is important to acknowledge it, because the word past is also a euphemism. We use the word past when we're referring to someone that has died. So I think that is also critically important to acknowledge. Her use of the word past 3 times in the stanza is also a euphemism for death. So she's talking about the inevitable death of an individual, but as she's going through and riding in this carriage with death, her life is passing her by. She's watching her life cycle. She's watching her childhood. She's seeing her life pass before her eyes. She sees her childhood, she sees her adulthood, and then she sees her eventual death as she is riding along. So that is important to look at. Next stanza, you have a shift, and that is probably one of the most important things. I know I always say this. This is important, but this is actually extremely important. So I'm going to draw a text box after I put an arrow here, and I'm going to insert the text box next to it so that we can make some notes and some annotations here. And in this particular thing, okay, so you have the shift where it says, or rather, he passed us. So we're talking about the setting sun. She's talking about death. So death passed us. Okay. The sun is personified, as I said earlier. Okay. So, and the sun, the persona, has also died. Okay. Then she says the dews drew quivering and chill. And then she says, for gossamer, my gown, my tippet only tool. Now, tippet is actually, a tippet is a roof of a building. It's kind of like, I don't want to say wainscoting, but it's like sort of a piece of a building. You can look it up on Google and it'll show you what a tippet is. But her usage of the word gossamer and gown, those are could be a burial shroud, funeral clothes, things like that. So really she's talking about how her gown is gossamer and her tippet is only tulle. She's not ready to die. Okay, and so that's really where the shift is. She's talking about the afterlife. Okay, so she's really focused on that aspect of it. And so that's something, and it needs to be acknowledged. So this next stanza, as we go into, it's actually really important that we acknowledge the word we here. So I'm going to change the highlighting color, and I'm going to go to purple because we all know purple's my favorite color. We is a collective noun. So it's a group of us. And she's talking about the sun. She's talking about death as the Grim Reaper. She's talking about herself as the dead person. We pause before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. Okay, so you could look at this in numerous ways. So again, I'm going to draw another text box here, and we're going to go into what this particular stanza could possibly mean. And I'm going to just sort of make notes and annotations on the word. So the roof here could possibly mean heaven. She could be talking about heaven. And then she says a house. So house could be anything. It could be living space. It could also be a mausoleum. And I cannot spell. A mausoleum, of course, is the space where families often have bodies stored. When people die, if you read Romeo and Juliet, you know that there was a vault that they referred to as the Capulet Vault. That was their mausoleum. She says the roof was scarcely visible. Again, heaven was scarcely visible. But again, talking about the swelling of the ground and talking about the house is where someone is comfortable. It's got sort of that, her grave offers a little bit of warmth, and possible, and now she says a chill. I mean, the dews drew quivering and chill, so the morning dew is chilled, but house also represents warmth. So it's kind of like a comforting place. So again, you can look at it in multiple different ways. So looking at that, a swelling of the ground, obviously swelling of the ground references her grave itself, but she could also be talking about a mausoleum where she's getting dropped off and it's her final resting place. So certainly, again, she could also be talking about a swelling of the ground, could be referring to the return to nature. You've heard the expression ashes to ashes, dust to dust. She could be put in the ground. So her burial at this point. Now, the last stanza, very, very important, because you have here where she says, since then, so time has passed. 'Tis centuries. That's a long time. She doesn't specify how many centuries, but she does say centuries. Since then, centuries have passed. Feels shorter than the day. Okay, so that's something is very important. Her talking about how much time has passed. She says since then, it's been okay, you have a completely new time period. Okay, you have hundreds of years have passed since her death. Okay, so you have that, and she sort of has a realization. Life goes on after one dies. Really, she says, I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. So she has this sort of realization that life goes on, and even after you're dead and buried in the ground, life will continue to go on after someone dies. So you have hundreds of years have gone by. I mean, so again, she says, but it feels like a short period of time. So she's sort of, again, watching things from the grave. So imagery, you have a lot. Now, I've, of course, commented on a lot of it as I've gone through and annotated, but we have the Grim Reaper, you have mausoleum, you have burial clothes, you have the sun, you have gown, well, that goes with burial clothes, you have school. I mean, you've got a lot of different things. You've got a house. So you have a lot of imagery there. Make sure that's spelled right. Okay, structure, again, structure, it's known as the common meter, because this can be rapped, like I said, it can be sung. It's sort of a hymn style. Again, most of Emily Dickinson's poems can be sung to the tune of Amazing Grace. And then you also have her use of the em dash and the enjambment, which is the interruption in a thought process. So she has that. And then, of course, you have some slant rhyme and then near rhyme. So you have me, immortality, and civility. Those particular words rhyme. Now, as far as theme and tone, so if you're really looking at it, your theme, you have several themes that you could go with in this particular poem. You have the theme of death. I mean, obviously. You also have the theme of mortality. You have the theme of immortality. Does anybody ever really die? And then you also have the theme of spirituality. Spirituality. I cannot spell this evening. I don't know why. It could be because it's super late at night. I'm not really sure, but it could be any number of reasons. Spirituality. Also, as far as tone goes, I personally think that it's a comfortable tone. The tone in this particular poem is comfortable. It's not dark and twisty. Um, it's sort of comforting because she's talking about she's too busy to stop for death. She's too busy living life to stop. And so, okay, well, death's gonna come and get you right there, right then and there. So you sort of have a little bit of everything here, but this is probably one of my favorite poems in and of itself. And I definitely would encourage you to try to wrap it or just listen to it. A lot of people have sung it to the tune of Amazing Grace, or even Gilligan's Island, but you probably are way too young to remember what that show is. So in that sense, those are the three poems that I asked you to read and was planning on annotating for you. So I annotated it with the computer here, and I hope that it helps make some sense for you on Emily Dickinson. And just make sure that you are ready to discuss these particular poems. And this is really what I'm looking for when it comes to annotation. The skill of annotation, and when it comes to annotating poetry, will serve you well when you get to upper level classes and looking at things. And I know those of you that are in Avid are aware of the importance of annotation, but annotating works, annotating literary works particularly, is very important because you have to look for the hidden meanings in poems. And Emily Dickinson was very, very difficult to interpret. She didn't always rhyme. She didn't always make sense, but one thing everyone knows and is very much a universally agreed upon theme is death. She was very preoccupied with death. Now, for class on Monday, I am asking that you read the Langston Hughes poems that are listed. You have in your critical case book, so you will need to have your textbook when you come to class on Monday, and we will discuss Langston Hughes poems and go over them and annotate them. Hopefully I will be back in my classroom. Testing is, I've got to be flexible with that, but I hope that this has helped you a little bit, and this will spark some conversation between all of you. You can even converse about how annoying my voice is, as long as you're talking and discussing the poems. That would be wonderful. So I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you again on Monday. You'll be ready and well read and prepared and ready to discuss Langston Hughes poetry. So have a great weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.